You are listening to the Growing Small Town Show, a podcast dedicated to supporting you, the person who really cares about the future of your small town. We believe when people get better, everything gets better, and our episodes offer the ideas and actions that prioritize people and small communities. Thank you for listening. We're so glad you're here. Our guest on today's episode is Chris Swenson, and he is a mental health practitioner of more than a couple of decades. And he is the owner of Rhino Wellness Center located in rural Colorado. He reached out to me. This was one of those fun things where he was looking for places to talk about this. He specifically offers mental health therapy, direct therapy services in a rural community. He is actually from a community not far from where we record this podcast. And so when he found me on the internet, he reached out and said, hey, I would love to talk. And today, the day that we recorded this episode is still in May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. And we couldn't think of a better topic to close out the first half of this season of the show than to discuss mental health with you all. So Chris offers some practical things along with just the general awareness that we need to think through as we tackle this still highly stigmatized topic. And so as I leave you for the summer, I just want to remind you all that if you are struggling, we've got all the links to all of the national kind of hotlines that you could call in the show notes. But more than anything, we just want to remind you that you don't have to struggle alone. You're not alone. And whatever it is that you're feeling, whatever it is that you're struggling with, you're not only not the first person, but you're not probably the only one dealing with it right now. Shame and difficulty and fear and doubt tends to make us feel, it pulls us to isolation and it pulls us to loneliness and kind of exacerbating all the panic and difficulty that comes with hard times. And we just want to continue to be a beacon of hope, of light, of possibility on this show. And Chris, everything he shares, just a lot of clear takeaways. Be sure to check out the show notes on this episode if you're interested in connecting with any of his resources. He refers to some podcast episodes where he goes into a little more depth about some of the things we discuss here. But enjoy your summer. If there's anything you want us to be tackling on the show when we reopen our season in September, just reach on out. You can contact me directly at director@growingsmalltowns.org. In the meantime, just don't forget, we're here, we're cheering you on, and we hope you have an awesome summer. We'll see you at the start of our next season. Hey, Chris, welcome to the Growing Small Town Show.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'm glad to be on. I appreciate the honor of coming on the show. So thank you so much.
Oh, you bet. So it's kind of, we're like second to the last day, the day that we're sitting here of the month of May. And it's Mental Health Awareness Month. And so I thought this would be a great show to cap the first half of this season here in 2026. So why don't you just share a little bit about, well, and honestly, you're one of the guests, and sometimes this happens, that you connected with me. You reached out to me based on something you'd seen or heard. So maybe share a little bit about that, because I always think that's fun for people to hear. Because I literally will respond. I will respond to your texts or emails if you reach out and say, hey, like I'm thinking about this. So, which thank you for doing it, because it's fun.
Yeah, because no, I mean, I have my own podcast and getting that kind of started. And I just started with my new project, the Rhino Resilience. And so I thought, what better way? I need to get out and try to get this out to people. So I searched around for a lot of other podcasts. And, I did have like ChatGPT kind of help narrow things down, but a lot of it was mainly me. And then the cool thing is when I spotted yours, I really loved what you do on the show. A lot of the things around the small towns, because I've always been told, like, in order to build like a strong community, you need to build strong people. And so I loved what you guys were doing on there. And so then as I kind of searched through your website, I'm like, oh my gosh, she's from Oaks. I know where that's at.
Like that doesn't happen all the time. So that was fun for me too.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, I grew up right in Wapaton, North Dakota. Listeners up that way might know where it's at. Down here in Colorado, they have no idea.
Right.
But it's I always tell them it's like right on the border between Minnesota and North Dakota. It's like a river, you cross it, you're there. But so I came across that. I thought, oh, man, this might be a great show to do. And so I just reached out. So I was glad that you did respond. Yes.
Yeah. Well, why don't you tell us a bit about your podcast? And we'll make sure to link it, of course, in the show notes. But just start anywhere you want with your background, and I'll jump in with questions. Like, what brought you to doing this podcast? What do you focus on? What do you think our listeners need to know?
Yeah, I think it kind of a little bit of a backstory on it. I mean, I've been a mental health therapist for over 20 years, and honestly, it's actually approaching 25 now. That kind of dates me as my age, but so basically 20 plus years in the trenches of mental health, and I've always operated in rural areas and seeing a lot of the problems that people are having. And for years, I would try different other projects like, okay, let me try to build this side business, or let me try to do this other thing, the entrepreneurial spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And things just weren't quite working, or it wasn't my passion. But there was this calling that I could hear telling me that, look, you built this idea of rhino mentality that you adopted that has changed your life for the better. And you've been basically teaching it in your therapy office for years. You need to bring it out to people. And I would ignore that little calling in us, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
until finally I said, okay, this is what I got to do because there's a lot of problems in our rural communities with mental health and stuff. Especially our suicide rates are outrageous. You look at 2.5 times more than urban environments. Some studies show 3.5, but it's even more than veterans at this moment. And then you look at the depression and anxiety that's going on, that's also increasing. And I kept thinking, what's going on? And I can't just wait until people get problemed really bad and then they come into my office and now I can help only so many. So I thought, why don't I get this out there? And so I built the website, got some articles on there. I created the podcast as well as I love to do that kind of venue to put out some different helpful tools. And I saw that there's a lot of people that are talking about mental health, bringing out awareness, especially for rural areas, which is absolutely amazing.
Yep.
However, there's this gap between bringing out awareness, but then what do you do after that?
Yeah.
What are those specific things? And I thought, wow, there's a lot of tools and tricks and tips that I've learned over the years that can be applied to people that they can begin to use, little each day. And a lot of things that people, for me, it's interesting because I've done this for so long that I assume that a lot of people already know this, but there
Mm-hmm.
are things people don't know about themselves that just learning how their mind and body works becomes helpful. And so I released like the Rhino Resilience podcast. I think I've got 10 episodes out now. So I'm
Okay.
just beginning. So I'm getting myself out there, trying to get connected with people to spread the word. So that's kind of a little bit how it got all started.
Okay, well, there's a couple things I want to share. I guess as I was listening to you, um, I don't know. You and I haven't talked about this, but mental health is like it's a really important thing that I think we have highlighted kind of consistently throughout the show for sure. I'm very pro therapy. I talk about it a lot, and in fact, whenever I can. If something really hits me in a session that I just know would resonate with people, I just share what I learned, right? Just because
Yeah.
I know that one of the challenges to accessing therapy, well, I think there's probably two for rural places is first just are there enough actual practitioners, right? Like there's an actual shortage of mental health practitioners in rural places. But then secondly, it's the affordability of it, or if your insurance covers, the access, the actual being able to access it.
Mhm.
And that is assuming those two things, those two barriers come after you've gotten over this internal stigma that we're
Mm.
still dealing with, right? So we in our little community here, we have this local mental health coalition. It's all volunteer and it's run under our umbrella just for funding if we apply for grants and things. But I can't tell you how this is why I was excited to have you come on. Because I think anytime a therapist says, I want to democratize that, that's the word I'm choosing. That might not be the right word, but distribute it more widely. So we can overcome some of those barriers, even if it is just sharing it through a podcast. Like, because I think um, mental health, and I want your opinion on this, Chris, as a practitioner. I feel like mental health has somehow been treated very differently than the rest of our health. Like it's isolated and parsed out as if it's this separate weird thing. And also, I think, so I want your opinion on these two things. Like, A, do you feel that way too? And then the second thing is just these things can actually be learned. There's skills that can be developed, practices that can be tried and repeated to where they become habitual. Like mental health isn't this thing that we just can't do anything about if we're struggling. I think sometimes those two things are still challenges with it in rural places, in smaller communities. I don't know. Tell me what you think about that. If that feels true, if like, and what you've seen in your experience with those two things.
No, I agree because I think that mental health has been treated differently compared to the other medical aspects. And I always tell people, like, I had enough training as much as a doctor has, but I certainly don't get paid like that, you
Right.
know?
Yep.
And, there's almost like this weird taboo. And people will say that kind of the wording of it too, where, it's, I'm struggling with cancer or whatever, but when it comes to mental health, it's as if it's an identity that I am depressed. And
Yes.
there's more to them than what that is, but there's been a weird language around that. And you're right, with rural areas, that's what I've seen is, you can have the limited access is one thing. Maybe there's not a whole lot of providers if there are any,
Mhm.
but then sometimes you travel great distances or you end up with online if some rural areas don't even have online access. And
Right.
so utilizing those is great, but the other end of it is do you have a therapist that understands rural small town culture? And that becomes a big non-fit sometimes with that. But a big thing that I've noticed is when we're struggling, especially out here, we tend to keep everything in and quiet. There's just this idea of we have to appear strong and stoic and we can handle things on our own. We don't want to burden other people, stuff like that. And a lot of the way I look at it with, I built Rhino Resilience on 4 pillars, but it's almost rebranding what strength really looks like
Yeah. I love
because
that.
the idea of being strong, I don't want to get rid of that in rural areas because you have to be. I think that is very, very important. It's
Mhm.
just knowing what strong really means, and what that looks like. And so having that strength for the long haul is what I'm after because we can tough things out, we can push through, we can get through things. There's no doubt about it. But can you do that consistently for the long haul? And that's where like the 4 pillars kind of come in. And when you adopt that from a different strength where you become stronger and wiser and more resilient than
Mhm.
before. Yeah.
Do you want to, are you, I don't want to have you share too much of your framework. Please share what you're willing to, but are you willing to kind of give me an overview of those 4 pillars? Like what
Yeah.
they are?
Mhm.
I would love to hear them.
Yeah. Because you get like the first pillar, which is strength with an unbreakable will. And what you'll find with the pillars is it's not like linear where you got to do pillar one, then move on to pillar two and such. They're
Yep.
all integrated, so it all comes together. So you get the first part about strength with an unbreakable will. And a lot of that is defining what true strength really looks like. Like strength isn't just, keep quiet, tough it out, push through. No, it's knowing when to reach out for backup. It's
Yep.
knowing when to bring in your teammates or people around you, and taking care of yourself. But the biggest one most people miss is recovery. And
Mhm.
so we need to get our nervous systems back down after a day and things like that. So strength is get to be redefined differently. But the unbreakable will piece that comes with it is the idea that when problems start happening, the first thing that usually goes for people personally, even in their business? Is there reason why, their sense of purpose? Why are they doing it? It starts to get questioned. And once you start to question your will or your purpose and your why, that's when things start to really break down easier. And so learning how to develop an unbreakable will, what that looks like, in building. And the second one is calm and steady. And this brings in, it's almost like two sides of a coin with strength, as we have out here. What we know is to be tough, push through, be hard, grit, grind, all that.
Mhm.
But there's another side to that coin, which is that calm and steady. And that's the part of being able to, how do you remain calm in the midst of chaos? And I understand that it's, when I hear that a lot of people say that, like, I mean, if I'm in a nosedive in an airplane at 30,000 feet and they tell me to remain calm, there's no, I don't know if anyone ever can.
Right.
So, yeah. So, what I'm getting at with being calm is just being able to manage your internal stuff so that your brain doesn't just hijack you into reactive mode. And
Mhm.
then there's the steadiness of what people really value, what people really need is that steadiness. And a lot of these are built off of the true nature of the animal of the rhino, where most people just see them as being aggressive and that, but they're really not. And they say they got such a thick skin, which isn't actually true. But you look at the ancient symbolism behind the rhino, and this is what you see about grounding, about calm, steadiness, along with that strength as well. And the third one is a big, massive one. It's about being adaptive and wise. And that's the idea of being flexible, adaptable. That could be emotionally, mentally, but learning all those tools and tricks about how to get through basically any environment imaginable and being able to have the wisdom to know which one to pick, when to reach out for backup, things of that nature, instead of just doing that, but building that wisdom that comes with it. And the last one, which is the fourth one, which is quietly powerful, speaks a lot about how you carry yourself. And that leads into leadership. It also leads into self leadership, how you lead yourself and talk to who you are. And that one becomes quite in depth, but those are basically kind of the four pillars in a roundabout way.
Okay, well, I love that. And I was gonna ask, like, I assumed that the word rhino was like based on the animal, but then I was like, what if I'm wrong about that? So I think I love that too, because there's imagery, right? Which is again, and also kind of it's that it's different than what you expect, or you have preconceived ideas about the animal, right? You were saying that people think they're
Yes.
this, they think they're that, but they're actually not. Okay, those are fantastic. You used a phrase that I obviously am quite familiar with, but I don't think has fully been kind of accepted more broadly, especially in rural communities, and it's the concept of a regulated nervous system.
Hmm.
Okay, I want you to expound on that a little bit, because one of the things that's cool about that is I think it takes this conversation out of that other and kind of separate conversation of mental health, and it reminds all of us that it's a bodily system, right? It is a physical bodily system, your nervous system.
Absolutely.
And I think that kind of language can sometimes help people. I don't know. I don't know if I honestly, it's hard for me because I am so open and accepting of mental health support, because I know what it's done for me. I know what it's done for my relationships. So I don't know if it's that people feel broken. Like, what do you think drives that? Because so I want kind of both of those things. Again, I'm always giving you two, but it's like, what do you think is it that makes it so hard for people to actually raise their hand and say, I'm struggling? And then how do you think the discussion about a nervous system can maybe assist with that? Because it reminds everybody that it's just something going on inside your body, just like your cardiovascular system.
Yeah. No, I love it. Yes. Keep with the two questions as long as I get them answered and remember.
I'll remind you on these two for sure. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that some of those barriers of kind of reaching out, we talk about stigma as being a big one.
Mhm.
And underlying some of that is we start to tie kind of our identity to being strong. And when something goes wrong, we feel like we've personally failed.
Right.
And I've had first responders that I work a lot with, or people that are in work out at a prison facility, whatnot. that they really struggle with some of these things because if, their superiors find out, they worry that, oh my gosh, are they going to lay me off? Are they going to, it might affect my job performance. And I try to tell them, like in my mind, it's, man, you twist your ankle, you're probably going to limp. That would be, people would look at you like, oh, you're normal. But when they look at anything you're struggling with, they go, oh, that's abnormal. And I think it's a lot of just how we've ingrained the differences between mental health and other medical things. So there's a number of things that get in the way with reaching out for help. And some of it is just being strong and not wanting to burden anybody else, stuff like that, that kind of gets in the way. But to the other part of your question, you look at, which is what I love to do, and it helps to work how my mind works, is finding a language that people understand.
Mhm.
Because what people are dealing with, it's biology. That's what
Yes.
I that's what I tell people. Like, you have a nervous system in you that is like an accelerator, like in a car, and you don't have to do anything to push on the gas. Like you have a difficult conversation with someone, pretty soon your heart rate starts going up, your breathing changes. If you've ever approached somebody that you're a little nervous to approach, you get up there and you can't think of what to say. Yeah, you just got emotionally hijacked right there from your brain.
Right.
And it's that accelerator runs, but we do have a brake as well, which is the other nervous system. But that's where I can get into the terms, but I really don't care about the terms a lot of times as long as people understand. But it's like a brake, and you can use that through breathing. The way you breathe, as long as your exhale is longer than your inhale, you'll
Mhm.
start activating that other nervous system to slow things down. Especially like if you're in a very difficult situation where, you need to like almost like a trauma situation where it's not good, you want to survive. If you don't understand how to take those deep breaths and keep the blood flow to the front part of the brain so that you can think, get your way out, your brain will just take over and you'll start panicking and, things like that. So learning those kind of deals and learning how to use your brake. And I always tell people too, just when you use your brake, it doesn't suddenly quit because many people will say that, like, I tried that, didn't work. And I'm like,
Yeah.
man, so I tell them, like, if your room's 100 degrees and then you turn on the AC, it doesn't immediately get cool. And that
Right.
doesn't mean the AC is not working. It just take time. And so sometimes it's just to take that. But that's part of that calm and steady because you may not feel calm in those moments. But if you can kind of keep it in that sweet spot, because you need a right amount of anxiety to deal with stuff,
Totally.
is the
Yeah.
idea.
Well, like when this kind of external stimulus happens, I mean, and so correct me if I'm wrong on this, please, but we're literally talking about that internal response of either fight, flight, fawn,
Mhm.
or freeze, right? Are the typical reactions that happen when we get flooded. And I think the thing that's interesting is that when you start to like I think when you start to break it down this way, first of all, you recognize that that happens inside of everybody,
Mhm.
unless there's some actual, what I don't know, maybe chemical imbalance, maybe like physical thing where, like pending, like, barring those things happening, this happens to every single person. And a lot of times, I think what's also been fascinating, what we don't always realize is that our knee-jerk route, whether it's fight, fawn, or freeze, a lot of times what becomes our natural choice is because of how we were taught to do it, right? What we were conditioned to do to either keep relationships or not lose love or not lose connection, those kinds of things. Um, and that doesn't mean it's actually helpful. It doesn't mean it's actually doing what we think it'll, should do. And we're obviously, most of the times, we're not overly conscientious. We're not even conscious of the fact that like our body is immediately taking a route. And so I don't know how much of your work feels like kind of, do you go back to people with like to their childhoods with people and talk about when did you first start kind of taking this route every single time when conflict comes up? I mean, is that part of what you have to do?
There are moments when that applies and you can. I know some other therapists, that's always the thing. You're gonna go back to the childhood.
Yeah, and it's
But
not always the right thing to do, I'm sure,
no,
but
And so on mine, I usually, if it's applied, if it is meant for that moment, yeah, to kind of help them discover. But a lot of times what I get at is that it's all neuroscience and your brain can change at any age, with
Amen.
neuroplasticity.
Yep,
And so
amen.
what goes on is we train our brains to respond. And so typically what goes on is I always say our brains are kind of like AI. It's whatever you think about, you're telling your brain, I want to think more about that. Look for ways for me to think more like that. And then it's like, hey, I behaved this way and it worked. Okay, I want to do that more often because our brains really don't care if we're happy or if we're successful. It only cares if we're safe and comfortable. And so a lot of those things you talk about that sometimes we've learned from a young age, it's just protective measures we've used.
Right.
When that nervous system is gone, how do we keep ourselves safe? And
Yep.
so people have these patterns that they may not be aware of. And some people, the pattern they had worked for them at some point. Like,
Well, of course.
whatever
Yep.
they had to deal with, it worked. But when you're not in that, it's no longer functional anymore. And so to me, what I love about like adaptive and wise in that area of the pillar is learning what your typical responses are, but
Yep.
also knowing that awareness of when the brain takes over, so that we have more than one, because like you said, the knee-jerk reaction sometimes might not be the best response,
Mhm.
and it's amazing how you don't know when it takes over. It feels very real
Yes, of
until you
course.
step out
Yep.
of it, and then you're like, oh my gosh, it got me again. But those are things that I like to work with people is a lot of it is how do I help you be more flexible and adaptable? I don't want to change who you are. I just
Yeah.
want to give you more tools and options so that this doesn't have to become a problem. In other words, you're bringing a hammer to every problem every
Yep.
time. Let's
Yep.
learn some other options that go on. And I
Yep.
know I did a lot of over the years, I did a lot of mental toughness training programs that were former Navy SEALs put on. And one of the things we had to do was cold water training. And that meant ice baths for how long and cold showers for how many days and very unpleasant. But the point of it wasn't like, wow, we did this. Look at us. It was the fact that when you turn off the hot water and it's just cold and you're about to enter, your brain is already looking for a way out. You start hearing like, this is crazy. What am I going to do? This is be cold. I don't need to do this.
Mhm.
But telling the brain that no and having that why and the purpose, and you go in and you do it. And then when it hits you, now you're dealing with your body. Like it takes your breath away. It's cold. You might be shaking and your brain is still like, let's just get out of here. And
Yep.
learning how to calm the body, stay focused while you're doing that, was a lot of what was being taught in there. But I think that kind of gets to what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was so interesting, right? Because I think, like you said it, our brains are wired to keep us both safe and comfortable. The comfortable thing is
Mhm.
something we have to like really understand. So all of us have different spectrums of what we find discomforting to comfortable, right? So I think one of the biggest gifts we can give ourselves is to learn how to be uncomfortable and still
Mhm.
stay calm and steady, right? Because that's true.
Mhm.
Those both of those things can and will inevitably be true. Because the goal of mental health therapeutic practices, whether it's like talk therapy or EMDR, there's so many modalities, right? That people can try. The goal isn't to make it so that you're never uncomfortable again, or that you never experience hard times, difficult feelings, difficult situations. Like that can't be the goal because we're not in control of all of that external stimulus. We can
Correct.
we can choose which rooms we want to be in, right? We can choose which relationships we want to be in. We can choose some of those things to a point, but none of us are in control of designing a world where we're free from conflict and free from pain and free from hardship. And so this need to normalize it and like I say normalize it, but just basically make it like it is par for the human existence. That's I still just think that conversation, it can't happen enough. And I think culturally too, like you're from this area, agriculture as that happens to be our primary economic driver, right? Where I
Mhm.
live, that has an entire generational culture
Mhm.
of stuffing down pain. At least that's going to be my anecdotal perspective, and you maybe feel differently, but I think there's just a lot in the way, like picking yourself up by your bootstraps was actually necessary. Like you said, we don't want to say that you don't have to be strong, because it's required to survive. And if you go back several generations, you think about pioneers, you think about like what first farmers had to do where we live. Yeah, they had to be tough, strong, they have to be tough. But we now live at a time where you can be those things and you can struggle, and they're not mutually exclusive
Uh,
things, right? So
mhm.
I think that's the other thing with rural communities. I think there's generational, I'm not gonna even call it trauma necessarily, but it's conditioning and patterning around
Mhm.
how we cope. That can, we can stand to revisit it, maybe, would be the way I would say it. Because it's not to
Yeah.
demonize it, right, or to criticize it. It's
Yeah,
just,
no, I think you bring up a great point because when you look at you can be both strong and struggling at the same time.
mhm,
And I know one of the number one reasons you can tell when you're dealing with like a problem trying to get at you is it gets you to think black and white, either or. And so people
I
get into
agree.
this, either I'm strong or I'm struggling. And if I'm struggling, that means I'm weak. And you can be both. That's the idea. Instead, helping people understand that that can be happening. And that's what's, magic for a lot of that. But I love what you said about the uncomfortable thing because it is, I think, culturally at large, there's a lot of things about making everybody comfortable in this, and that's great. But I don't think anyone really builds resilience. The only time you really can make a big change in your life and really train your brain is when you're going through some challenges.
For sure.
It's
Yep,
those uncomfortable times, but being able to be comfortably uncomfortable is what people are after. And I know I've worked with people where they live uncomfortability all the time. Like that's completely different. That will break you down and wear you down. But what I'm
absolutely.
talking about is for a lot of us over time, and I think even for people that are business owners or whoever, it's the same thing. We can get in our routines and we keep doing things that we're comfortable with. But how is that advancing who we are?
Yep.
But learning to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation and then practicing those abilities to remain calm and steady and stay focused on what you do. That was a lot of the cold water training kind of things. And I think it's valuable for people, but I love that either or. And I think on a podcast, because I know I outlined all four pillars in depth on them that are out there available.
Oh,
People they
good.
want,
Yep.
they
We'll make
can
sure
check.
we will absolutely link to those.
Yeah, and I think in there I talked about some of those things, the either or type thinking when you can see some of that. But I always make sure that I end up with giving people applied actual steps and not just bringing out the awareness as well.
Yeah, that's
But
great.
no, what you're talking about is right on. Yeah.
I think being able to embrace nuance is one of the hardest things to learn. Like especially if you are an analytical person and you already have like I don't have black and white thinking. It's just not like everything is gray to me, and I love the nuance. I thrive in the nuance actually. So it's these some of these things are very hard for people that might have more of a predilection to being like it's this or it's that, right? But I think you've said it too. This is like a muscle. Like once you and you might have to try a number of different practices like before you find the thing that really works for you and
Mhm.
helps you kind of either calm or regain some kind of control if you're feeling like you're panicking, or again, it's a bunch of different scenarios that we've talked about so far, right? But I get frustrated when
Hmm.
I still feel like the conversation is like as if this can't be something that you can actively improve in your life. Like people have honestly a lot of control in a lot of situations. Now you just talked about one, like I never want to be flippant about the fact that there are people, there are communities, there are groups of people for sure, that are living in present conditions that make what we're talking about damn near impossible. I do understand that, but we're talking about kind of barring those things being true, like there's a lot we each can individually do. And so let me ask that. I want to ask this question. What are like your top 3 things? And again, everybody will direct into your podcast episodes where you talk about these things more, but
Mhm.
what have you found in working with people to be kind of the top 3 things that if they could learn how to do would help them regain some of this, the control when they're in
Mhm.
conflict?
Yeah. No, I like the questions. And for me, like there are so many ways, and then I get so specific and okay, what's really going on right now? That'll be a thing. But I know the biggest part for a lot of people, I always tell them your first piece is awareness. Like you
Mhm.
have to get awareness of what's going on within you. What are your reactions? What are you typically thinking? What starts to run through your head, especially in those situations where you start to feel that uncomfortability. In that moment, like your mind starts to kind of go different places. Learning those gives you a good tool of recognizing how it's starting to kind of hijack you into a different response than you want to do.
Mhm.
So awareness is always the first piece whenever you make different things. And I think a lot of people is the recovery piece is what I'm after. I do a lot of that where it's how to slow that mind, how to slow down the body and be able to, maintain that sense of calm. And that's a lot through breathing. And there's a many different breathing practices that people can engage in. But what I tell people is it has to be like a practice. You can't just when you get in that moment, it's hard to think, oh yeah, what did he say again about what I was supposed to do? It's hard to think. And
Mhm.
so you always reduce to your level of training when things happen. And so there's times where throughout the day, it's just making sure you're stepping back, taking some deep breaths, maybe focusing on some things that bring you joy, doing something, just take a couple minutes to reset, bring that nervous system down because we only have so much capacity. Capacity is a term that can be defined technically, but for me, it's just basically how much can your cup be filled
Yep.
before it overflows.
Yep.
And throughout the day, it just gets filled up. And sometimes before we even started the day, it's already been filled up, but
Exactly.
it's reducing it throughout the day. So a lot of things that I recommend for people is it's not about changing who you are. It's just changing how you go at the day, instead of just hit accelerator and run through and grind until the end of the day. And then if you can rest, great. But, I know my kids are all grown out of the house now, so there's moments I can relax. But before that wouldn't happen. Like you just redo. But finding it throughout the day, a few times throughout the day when you can just be mindful, put your feet on the ground, notice that you're sitting, if people notice the chair that you're sitting on, do you notice your feet touching the ground? If you're walking, do you notice every step?
Yep.
Sometimes looking at a tree and just kind of moving side to side with the tree. I mean, unless it's like really windy, but on a nicer day,
It's
but
almost
being,
always windy up here, Chris. You know this.
yeah, same thing out here in the northeast corner of Colorado. Everybody always thinks mountains, but out here it's all ag. It's all
Yeah,
just plains.
prairie
Yeah.
and wind, huh? So yeah, you're at
Yeah.
least not too different from where you were raised. But the one thing I just want to say that I think is so fascinating, is these things sound so simple, but they're actually things that most of us aren't doing. I mean,
Mhm.
truly, there have been times where, like if I'm feeling really stressed, I will stop and say to myself, like, I'm not breathing. Like I will hold my breath. I will
Mhm.
notice that I'm holding my breath.
There you go.
And so it's super interesting because obviously we're always breathing because we're living, but that ability to like truly just slow down and like you said, and I love that you said that in stress we get to we reduce to the like our level of training. Such a great reminder because it's like you have to do these things enough, work those muscles enough so that when your body needs them, they respond. Like
Hmm.
I mean, that's basically what you're saying. So the deep breathing thing is super easy because you can do it absolutely anywhere. And you
Hmm.
always have it with you, you know? Like it's one of the
Yeah.
most accessible things that we can teach ourselves. And the other thing with like, do you feel your feet on the ground? Are you feeling the wind? I also think just maybe if you go for a walk, do it without earbuds in. Like walk around the block and just let your, because I just think we're so inundated, right? We're taking in
Oh
a
yeah.
lot of information. There's a lot of stimulus, more than there's ever been. And I think there's lots of reasons why that might be kind of exacerbating some of our challenges. Like there's so much we could talk about that. Where, back a few generations ago, where you weren't always distracting yourself with either something you're watching or something you're listening to, you didn't have a phone in your hand. I think we maybe could access these things a little easier. And now you have to be really diligent about it. You have to like make a strong
Mhm.
choice. If I want to actually take in nature, you have to intentionally unplug,
Yeah, it's different in the modern
so
world today.
it's so
Yes.
different. It's so different. And so, but I think these reminders just they're good reminders. And for those of us in rural places, small communities, we're actually close to nature.
Mhm.
That's one of the beauties of being out here. And so, those are fantastic tips. And I think again, just reminding people that you actually have a lot of what you need inside of you. And it's just reminding yourself how to use it, why to use it, why to slow down and breathe, because people might be like,
Mhm.
why do I have to do that? Obviously, I'm breathing. But like you said, will you access that as a tool if you're not training your body to do it?
Yeah, because I find myself, because there's certain phrases that I'll use that I train my brain to have. And what's remarkable is in
Ooh,
those moments, it's there. And so
can you
I
give me an
do it when it's,
example?
yeah, I mean,
What's one of your go-to phrases? Because I love technically I call them mantras. I don't know if that's the
yeah.
right word, right? But just things, affirmations, mantras that you repeat to yourself.
Yeah, there's a couple of them that go quite a bit, like control the controllables. Actually, I'll say control the
Yeah.
controllables, Chris. But also slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
Oh,
And
love
so
that.
with that one, a lot is because people get rushed when they're doing something and
Mm-hmm.
they get sped up. That's the idea, get sped up. Once you start getting sped up, you need to make sure you control that. Otherwise, you're going to make mistakes. And
Yep.
so the idea is reminding yourself that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Then you're just very hyper focusing on what you're doing. You might be maybe a nanosecond or something slower, but you're not going to make the mistakes. So I do that even when it's a simple thing like, okay, I've got a bunch of things on my list to do today. Oh my gosh, here we go. And I'm like, all right, slow is smooth, smooth is fast, Chris. I'll just do it at a lower level before it even gets to a bigger, more stressful environment. And I find that when that time comes, it comes to me. And then, like, control the controllables is we tend to quickly get on trying to control the environment around us,
Right.
um, things we can't control, especially like in rural areas, especially with ag and that they operate in a world where it's basically uncontrollable,
Mm-hmm.
and so controlling controllables, all you can control is yourself and your attitude. That's your response and your attitude. So during those times, I try to get myself, control the controllables. What are your options? What
Right.
are your options? And that helps direct my brain through those questions to look at options for me. Now, your brain's going to come up with stuff. It's like Google, and whatever you
Exactly.
ask it, like you could ask it, why am I stupid? And it's not going to tell you whether you are or not. It's going to
It's
give
going to
you
give you
reasons where you could
evidence.
potential. Yes.
Yeah, right.
And
It's
so the idea
confirmation
is,
bias.
yes. And so the
Yeah.
idea is when you say, like, what are my options? You want to start looking for those options about how am I going to respond? How am I going to deal with these? Another one I use is, how's that working out for you, Chris? That's a reminder to like stop doing what you're doing. Apparently, it's not working.
Yep.
You know?
Right.
Yeah, I remember
Yep.
a time I was putting some flooring in the house and everything went great. It's just Chris cannot do art very good. So doing these cuts to get around certain things wasn't working. I was getting so frustrated, getting so built up. Pretty soon I was about ready just to smash things down. And I stopped and I'm like, how's that working out for you, Chris? Maybe you need to take a break because when you're more frustrated, it's not going to work. Yeah. So I'll
Yeah.
use just different things that kind of come through.
Yeah. I think that's great. And so, as we kind of wrap up our conversation here, um, I wanted to ask if you see a difference in gender in your practice in small communities, and if that's just
Mhm.
stereotypical or if there's some truth to it.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is some truth to it, difference between men and women that are there, no doubt. And I think a lot of that comes by socialization.
Mhm.
And I know out here in rural areas, I think women get that idea of being more feelers, and so it's a little more open that they talk about things, whereas men were supposed to be closed off and stoic, which to me that is not being strong.
Yep.
Um, I think there should be a blend between the two, but it really comes to the individual, as how they've been kind of socialized as well, because not everybody fits that typical mold a lot of times. So
Right, right. And I think that's the whole thing is just, on our show, we try to highlight conversations that can help anybody that might be listening to it. Kind of, sometimes they're more pointed towards certain groups of people, whether they're like business owners or community leaders or what have you. But this conversation and the importance and value of taking care of your body holistically, which includes your
mhm.
mental and emotional health. I just can't imagine a time where we won't continue to talk about it, right? Because
Yeah,
it's awesome that you recognize within yourself and within your practice a way to extend what you're doing in sessions with people outside of that, so more people can access it. I love that you're recording podcasts. That's so great. We will make sure to give access to all of what you've done so far in the show notes to our guests. But I want to thank you for reaching out. Like I said, this is Mental Health Awareness Month, um, and everybody's got mental health. Like mental health is something we all have. So it's just a matter of if we're taking good care of it and stewarding it well, or if we're not. And you've given us some awesome ways to think about it. And I think practical tools too, like you said, it's not just know this is a thing, but also try some things. Try some of the things that were discussed
Mhm.
here. And by all means, if you're listening to this and you're still really, really struggling, please, please just reach out. Reach out. We'll put all of the national kind of hotlines and numbers. We'll
Nice.
we'll put all of that in our show notes for
Mhm.
this episode as well. Um, but there are people out here that will listen, that will help you. You do not have to struggle by yourself. Is there anything else you would want to leave our guests with as we wrap, Chris?
Yeah, I like when it is to help people to reach out. And I think when reaching out doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go to a therapy office. Reaching out is a lot about talking to a spouse, family member, friend, pastor, mentor, whoever that might be. Because one of the things the problem always does to us is try to isolate us, get us
Right,
to believe that we're the only ones. And so connection is what's massive. And so just reaching out and connecting. And you don't have to tell people your whole story. It just sometimes you might have to come out and just kind of say, hey, yeah, I've been really struggling with this lately, something like that. At other times, it's just being around people can be a
right,
valuable tool
right.
with that. But a lot of things I like to tell people is you're not broken, you're not going crazy. It's what we talked about. It's just biology. I mean, I do joke sometimes depending on the person in my office
Yep,
because they'll say like, I think I'm going crazy. And I'm like, well, you are in a therapy office. And then
yeah,
we get a
right,
laugh out of that. But I mean, it depends on the person.
yep.
But the truth is no, you're not broken. You're not this. You're not weak.
Mhm.
You're going through something that you've been carrying too much weight for too long. And learning how to carry it differently is what we need, especially if we want to build better communities, is we
Oh my
have to talk
goodness,
about
yes.
this differently, is the biggest thing. Yeah.
And I think capacity is a great way to think about it, right? Like we can only succeed as a community if we have capacity. And if each individual person in our community is being asked to eat from a platter when their capacity is a saucer or like a salad plate, right? We have a capacity problem. And I think it's important, like how are you actually filling that back up?
Mhm.
What are you doing to, and that's at the individual level, but then we see it at the macro level of a community too. So I think the other aspect is like if you're struggling, reach out, but I would also just remind everybody to check in on your people,
Mhm.
check in with each other. And it can even just be as simple like, hey, you were on my mind, wondering how you're doing, would love to hear from you. Just let people know that they matter to you, because that's something that, again, like you said, our problems try to isolate us. And you never know when that message that you're sending to someone you love might be exactly what they need to be reminded that they're not
Yeah.
alone, right?
I got a great story around that. It's a
Please
true
do.
story. I had a guy years ago who came into my office and he told me this story that he felt invisible. Nobody cared. He was going to look to end his life. And he decided, I'm just going to go in this grocery store, and if no one acknowledges me, then that's it, I'm truly invisible. And he said that he went down some aisle. I don't know which aisle it was, but anyways, there was just this lady who had a little kid in her cart and just walked by, and all she did was smile and nod to him. That was it. And she had no idea that she probably held this man's life in her hands. But that changed everything for him, where then he sought help and came. So I always tell people, like, if you start noticing people being a little bit different in this, have that courage just to reach out and ask, how are you doing? And we do it all like, how are you doing? Good. Like, no, no, no. How are you really doing?
Right. That is a beautiful story. And it's something that like resonates so much for me, because I run into all sorts of people at the grocery store. It would be it's a great place. But I think I also just want to issue the reminder to everybody listening to this that like, we actually have that power. So instead of like, I think the slow is smooth thing is really interesting. We all could take this as a reminder to slow down. We're coming up into the summer months, right? Slow down, take the earbuds out of your ears when you're walking, look up and look people in the eye, greet them, say hello, say good morning, say good afternoon, say, hey, great to see you. Like that's the thing that we are supposed to have a leg up on our urban friends, right? Because we're connected and we're tight. So this is, I guess, the reminder to behave that way. Because we need to reverse that trend. The idea that we would have a suicide rate in rural communities either 2.5 to 3.5 times more than our urban counterparts. We have it within us. We have the ability to reverse that.
Absolutely.
And it's all about connection, right? It's all about human to human contact, looking out for each other. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And thank you for reaching out to me so we could have this conversation. It's just a great way to end the first half of this season. So appreciate you being here, Chris.
Well, I appreciate being on too, and any chance we get a chance to talk about these things and spread that out, that's kind of my mission. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to come on here and share a lot of these things. And hopefully I always do this, like, as long as we reach one person. I do a lot of speaking events at different places, and if I can just reach one person in the audience, that's what matters. So if there's somebody out there that maybe resonated with somebody, share this episode with them, or even if it's for yourself, who knows, but just share this with other people, because you never know the difference that you can make in the lives of somebody else. Yeah,
for sure. Thank you for making the difference. We'll see you soon. We hope you loved this episode of the Growing Small Town Show. We encourage you to leave us messages at 701-203-3337. And be sure to subscribe to our newsletter at growingsmalltowns.org. In the meantime, keep doing what you can with what you have right where you are. Your community needs you.
Because we are growing small towns. We are growing small towns. We're right here living our best lives, as crazy as it sounds. But we are growing small towns. Growing small towns, we are growing small towns. We are growing small towns.